Ah, righty, thank God. Right, so you've just bought yourself a lovely new camera and you're on YouTube looking for some tips to get you started on your photography journey. Well, you've come to the right place. Today, I have 3 tips for you that are definitely going to get you well on your way to becoming a great photographer. So let's go. Right, number one on our tips is ISO. So, in very basic terms, ISO refers to your camera sensor's sensitivity to light as a numeric value. The higher you set your ISO, the more sensitive it will be, and the lower the number, the less sensitive. So ideally, you want to keep this number as low as possible, as raising the ISO is going to introduce noise into your image. So what is noise, I hear you asking? Right, so noise in your image basically looks like grain. Imagine 100 ISO is like watching Spider-Man in 4K, and 5000 ISO is like watching a Dracula movie from the 1920s. So the higher you set your ISO, the grainier your image is going to be. So a low ISO typically starts at 100, but some cameras can go even lower than this. And a high ISO is subjective, but can be anything over about 3200 or so. But again, some cameras can go much higher than this. For instance, my R6 II can go as high as 102,000. Not that I would ever shoot that high, but if I really needed to in low light. So to give you an idea of how noise affects your images, I've done a few test shots to show you what happens as you raise your ISO. Certain cameras can handle noise much better than others, and typically newer cameras are much better at dealing with it. If you have a camera from sort of 15, 20 years ago, you'll probably find once you get to about 800 ISO, you're going to be introducing quite a lot of noise into your image. So, if we're on a nice day shooting outside, you'll be able to set your ISO to 100, no problems. Inside or later in the day, so the sun's getting a bit low, you're probably looking at 1600 or even 3200. But both those on modern cameras still be perfectly fine to shoot. So, to summarize, ISO is your camera sensor's sensitivity. The higher numbers equal more light, but they will also equal more noise. Lower numbers will equal less light, but they will give you less noise. Right, so next up we have shutter speed. And exactly as it sounds, shutter speed is the amount of time your camera sensor is exposed to light in order to capture an image. Shutter speeds typically go from as low as 30 seconds on most cameras to as fast as 1/8000th of a second, although some cameras can shoot even faster than this. Now, if you choose shutter priority on your camera, this will let you choose how fast you want to shoot while your camera works out everything else for you. So say you wanted to capture a fast moving subject and freeze the action, you would then choose a fast shutter speed, maybe something around 1/500th of a second. Alternatively, uh, alternatively, if you want some motion blur in your image, you can choose a slower shutter speed, maybe around 1/10th of a second. It's entirely up to you. Try experimenting with different shutter speeds to see what effect they have on your images. Generally, the faster your subject is moving, the faster you would need to shoot if you want a sharp image. So again, to summarize, the slower your shutter speed, the more motion blur you'll get. The faster your shutter speed, the less motion blur. So finally, we have aperture. This refers to the size of the opening in your lens which lets light pass through to your sensor. Now, the smaller the number you choose, the larger the hole will be and the more light can pass through. The higher the number, the smaller the hole and less light can pass through to your sensor. Now, aperture is referred to using f-stops or f numbers. An aperture of 1.4 is very wide, so it lets in lots of light, whereas an aperture of f22 is very small and lets in much less light. Now, the aperture range of your lens will be written on the side of your lens somewhere. Sometimes they're on the front, around the front optic, sometimes they're on the side. I mean, for instance, an 18 to 55mm kit lens will often have an aperture range of 3.5 to 5.6, whereas say an 85mm lens could have an aperture of 1.2. But generally speaking, the lower the number, the more expensive the lens will be, because it can let in much more light, which will make the lens much more versatile. So that's how aperture works, but what would we use it for? Now, aperture controls the depth of field in your image, or how much of your image is in focus. The lower the f number you use, the less of your image will be in focus. For example, if I was, say, shooting a portrait, so I had a model and I'm using an aperture of f1.4 and I'm focusing on my model's face, then only her face would be in focus. The background would be totally blurred. This blurred area is referred to as bokeh or bokeh. It's actually the Japanese word for blur or haze. But if I was shooting a landscape and wanted my whole image in focus, then I'd choose a much higher f number, such as f11 to f14, maybe even f16. I mean, this is very basic, just on a beginner level, as there's much more to this which defines how much you will get in focus. For instance, your distance from your subject and the focal length you're using, all these things make a difference. So if you want to have a go at this, all you need to do, set your camera to aperture priority. This allows you to choose the depth of field you want whilst letting the camera work out everything else for you. So to summarize on aperture, aperture is the size of the opening in your lens that lets light pass through to your sensor. The lower the f number, the more light, but the less depth of field. The higher the f number, less light will come in, but you'll get a greater depth of field. So there you have it, ISO, aperture and shutter speed. If you can master these, you'll be well on your way to taking great photos. If you want, you can just start out by using auto ISO in either shutter priority or aperture priority and play around till you're comfortable with what they do. Once you become a bit more comfortable, you can then start controlling the ISO as well. You may take a while to get the hang of it, but there's no hurry. It's all about having fun, and the only person you should be competing with is yourself. Right, so we're all done. Thank you very much for watching. Please leave a like and consider subscribing if you like my videos. And if there's something in particular you'd like me to cover in future, then feel free to leave a comment and I'll make a video on it. See you real soon.